Good morning, everyone. My name is William Pomeranz, and I'm Deputy Director of the Kennan Institute. And we are delighted to have with us today for a book talk, Dr. Dreitzer, talking about his memoir, In the Jaws of the Crocodile. Dr. Dreitzer spent a decade contributing to the magazine Crocodile, the major party-sponsored satire magazine known for its sharp-tongued essays and pointed cartoons. His memoir explores what it means to be a satirist in a country lacking freedom of expression. Before we get started, though, I want to encourage everyone who is attending that you can stay up to date with the Kennan Institute and its events and publications by visiting our website and subscribing to our blogs, The Russian File and Focus Ukraine, as well as our podcasts, Kennan X and The Russian File. For those of you watching today, you can save 30% on the cost of the book by using the code CROC, capital C-R-O-C 30, on the University of Wisconsin Press website through July. Again, we will be taking your questions, so if you could send those by email at kennan@wilsoncenter.org, to our Twitter at Kennan Institute, or right on our Facebook page. Please be sure to include your name and affiliation when submitting your questions. We will not be able to include your questions if you do not include that information. Let me briefly begin by introducing Dr. Dreitzer. He was born in Odessa, Ukraine, the Soviet Union, into a working class Jewish family. He began his writing career as a freelancer, contributing satirical articles to leading Soviet periodicals, and also in satirical newsreel, The Wick. Eventually blacklisted for writing an article critical of an important official, he immigrated to the United States, settled in Los Angeles, where he earned a PhD in Russian literature from UCLA. Since 1986, he has been a professor of Russian at Hunter College in New York City. He has published numerous books, including Forbidden Laughter, Soviet Underground Humor in 1980, and also Shush, Growing Up Jewish Under Stalin, a memoir. His work has been published in Russian, Polish, and Israeli journals, and we are delighted to have Emil here. So Emil, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great honor to present my story of the Soviet satire, my book on Soviet satire to the audience. And primarily my impetus to write this book is because there are so many misconceptions about the Soviet system for a variety of reasons, but primarily probably because of the Iron Curtain, who worked on both sides. I mean, we didn't know much about the West, and the West didn't know much about the true, details of the Soviet life. And primarily, even I remember that when I first told my son, who born in Moscow, but grew up in America, he says, Dad, isn't it Soviet satire sound like contradiction in terms? How could it be? And actually, that's why I decided to write this book, and actually to explain to me how it was possible to do. So in effect, I would like to illustrate it just to show the magnitude of the Soviet satire in the life of the country, that to compare it, for example, with American satirical publications. So in their heydays, National Lampoon, I looked up at the time of Watergate scandal, the peak of it was 1 million copies monthly was published at that period of time, right? Then Mad Magazine had also 2 million, okay? Crocodile regularly published every 10 days an issue, 6 million copies each. That means 20 millions overall. As you see, it's not nothing. And whether It has nothing to do with the scandals of, as you understand it, any country. Also, starting 1961, the Mosfield Studios produced all-union satirical magazine, The Week, Fitil in Russian. That's its logo opening. It was a tremendous popularity in the country. Usually they showed it before the main feature shown in the movie theaters. So why the Soviet satire existed to begin with? It is known that Joseph Stalin, not himself, but through Malenkov, who read a prepared speech, said in 1952, we need our Soviet goggles and Saltykov-Shchedrin. And Saltykov-Shchedrin is one of the major Russian satirical writers of 19th century. I wanted to write a book on his art. So in 1952. So what were the tasks of the Soviet satire? In a nutshell, to fight separate shortcomings that obstruct our movement to the shining heights of communism. Separate, that's very important. Now, so what were the targets? Rank and file employees, for what? For poor work discipline, I mean, wasting time on taking long breaks, smoke breaks, poor workmanship. See, the director of the factory and the quality control inspector fight whether to put the the stamp of good quality. That was a permanent kind of a theft at workplace, because vast majority of people could not survive on their salaries. Everybody stole whatever they could from where they can, and Crocodile obviously fought it by ridiculing it. And in this particular case, what you see is obviously you see the worker of the tire factory takes it out and say, hey, after all, isn't everything in this country belongs to the working people? You know, that making fun of that kind of a reasoning. Cheating in the stores. Well, anyone who lived in the Soviet Union knows how that cheating in the stores was prevalent, primarily, again, because they stole to put it in their, to supplement their income. The other target, low and middle management. That's also important. What? The usual, the bureaucratic merry-go-round, or bribery. They were prevalent. Actually, it was a saying in my time in the Soviet Union, if you want anything to move, you have to grease it. So that's obviously Crocodile made it so. Fraud of all kinds. Why? Fraud to get bonuses. Otherwise, again, to supplement the miserly salary. So in this, what you see is the cover of the Crocodile. And so the official says, what's with you? Haven't you read the report? We already took care of this harvest. In other words, they reported, they already got their bonuses and so on. Cooking the books to get bonuses also. And that's clear, instead of 10%, 100% and so on. Mismanagement. That's also that tremendous, specifically the next cartoon is about the new technology. It was obviously Soviet Union tried to catch up with the West, often buying licenses for new technological equipment and so on, but it never was really, nobody was really interested to do anything at it. So I found a good use of new technology. Obviously, we see what kind of a use he found. And then again, obviously, they open up a little bit. The Crocodile depends on political kind of situation. The country allowed less or more things to be attacked by on its pages. This particular cartoon, I believe it's 1980, in the time of Gorbachev, 1988. So it would be probably impossible to see it in my time, in 1960s and 1970s, when I was writing for the Crocodile. In the middle of operations, this is Scalpel. They promised to deliver it in the third quarter of the year. Again, see, that kind of things, it's a sign of this glasnost in perestroika under Gorbachev. So to widen up a bit of it. Abuse of power, rudeness and high-handedness, of officials of, again, low and middle rank, um, criticism, suppressing any criticism. So little Wolf says uh, to the teacher, if you fail me now, my daddy will eat you alive. Also, using your power of a boss to select a secretary, not because of her quality of her work, but of her age. Well, which of the secretaries should I let go? You know, things like that. So passing the buck. It's also not taking a responsibility, always to say somebody else is guilty of what that we did not do this or that. And actually in Russian, I wouldn't say it's a Soviet invention. It was in the following, the saying in Russian, "Во всем виноват стрелочник," actually goes back to 19th century at the time of the railroads started sprawling out in the country. And they were always, who is guilty? Oh, the little man, the one, you know, the switchman. So it means it all amounts to a switchman. Switchman is guilty, not us. And then again, suppressing any criticism. Yesterday, some rabbit dared criticize me. Get it here at once. And the secretary says, here it comes, already cooked, as you see. Poor medical service for population. Okay, so as you see, ambulance coming. Yes, the man you asked about used to live here a year ago. May his soul rest in peace. Wait, again, this much later edition of Crocodile, the time of glasnost and perestroika. In my time, it would be not possible to use it. So general, and of course, general and population, antisocial behavior, drunkenness is the cover of the Crocodile, that basically you're committing suicide, some of pizza, they say in Russian, okay? Or misbehavior of youth at night, not giving rest to population. That's the one of the most typical stories. Now, however, many years later, I have to say that for many years, I look back at my work in Soviet satire, and I was kind of proud in what sense? I was proud that I never wrote anything of, say, glory to the system. I always criticized it, and I thought I did the right thing, and nothing bad would come out of it. But relatively recently, a year ago or so, I found in research that actually there was a hidden task of open criticism of economic targets in the Soviet press to create false facade to hide true military capabilities. Where it comes from? One of my colleagues, she found the following, that in 1930s, Joseph Stalin gave the following advice to Minister of Lazar Kaganovich, who was the Minister of railroad system. And he told him, see, why wouldn't you see that Gudok is the main paper that for the railroad industry and other newspapers print as much as possible about the sloppiness, the viciousness, glitches, shoddy work. We don't want those dopes abroad to see the forest for the trees. Our true figures and achievements are to be kept secret, while our petty problems that we have plenty, of course, should be glaringly apparent. Soviet transportation in ruins, abominable industrial output, the works. So obviously, Kaganovich couldn't believe it. So with photographs, and Joseph Stalin said, well, why not? In our position, a subtle policy is needed. You don't win if you don't cheat. In other words, part of it, but that was Irina Pavlova published in the journal Russian Studies History. She found it. So in other words, it was some also a sense of that in the West, they would accept all kinds of things that he study talks about as, oh, the whole system is not really working. However, utmost importance was given to the military capabilities. So what was totally forbidden to criticize in Soviet press? All faults of the socialist economy had to be shown as being local and sporadic, not systemic. Just separate shortcomings, as they say. You cannot say, for example, that the shoes in this country is really impossible to produce. No, you have to say this particular factory, the shoes of this particular factory are not of good quality now. That's it, not that the system is not working. To avoid public panic, no press reports on shortages of medicine. Also, no party apparatus is to be criticized by any paper other than Pravda, the instrument of party central committee. And my God, no criticism of Soviet foreign policy, not at all. That it means they take care of it and you just follow. But at the same time, when I was talking to I write in the book, when I talked to my friends who also took part in this satirical activity, that we found by talking to each other that some territories were totally close to criticism, even within the ranks that we're talking about for middle and low bureaucrats. You could not. Why? For example, in Brezhnev time, two Moscow regions, Baum and Perov and Krasnodartsi, because personal friends of Brezhnev were officially in charge of this territory. So nothing bad should have happened there, even the minor things. So what happens if a journalist oversteps the boundaries of the permitted inadvertently? Well, depending on the gravity of his or her mistake, he could be just simply reprimanded or be fired, or the editor-in-chief to be summoned to the Bureau of Propaganda of Central Committee. I described what happened in my case when I published my piece, and the editor-in-chief of Crocodile had to go to the Central Party Committee and fight. So now, the question how I came about it, frankly speaking, I never thought I would do anything like that. Obviously I wanted to be, as many young people, wanted to be a writer when I grew up, but I never thought that I have anything to do with satire. That's not what particularly I didn't feel it's my genre. However, one of the editors of Komsomol, Moskovsky Komsomol, is the most Komsomol member of Moscow Komsomol member. He suggested something when I came in, brought some lyrical piece. He said, why wouldn't you write some, oh, you're from Odessa. Oh, Odessa, then why don't you write a satirical piece for us? It is assumed that Odessa, well, symbolically is like a capital of humor in the Soviet Union. All underground jokes are produced there, primarily because Odessa is a melting pot of many nationalities, and humor was always traditionally part of it. So therefore, he gave me a letter, and I wrote some piece about that. Why would you, the young mother came to the store and asked, why would you give me please these ounces for my baby? And the seller says, is your baby choleric or sanguinic? Is it phlegmatic? In other words, why are you asking? What has to do? Well, no. If he is really very energetic, the ounces will sell, they will be destroyed very shortly. So that was the piece that was published, and from there started my career. But the turning point when I published in Crocodile this feuilleton, we call it, Shut Up, Scatterbrain, about the play that I saw in some provincial town, and brought it back, came back to Moscow, wrote a piece. The editor, the editor-in-chief read it, and obviously everybody was approved and was published. What we did not know, none of us knew, nothing was against the play itself, but it turned out to be that the author of the play at the time when the feuilleton appeared in Crocodile was untouchable, because he was editor-in-chief of the magazine Theater that was appointee by the Minister of Culture. And that means he was not supposed to be criticized for anything. So that's actually the turning point where I stopped writing for Crocodile. And I thought that my satirical career is over. But luckily, at that time, a sapient satire started to have prominence in Soviet press. Why? Because in 1960, after the suppression of Czech attempt to create socialism with human face, literary gazettes started to publish pieces of satire that would be hidden from kind of a reader who doesn't read between lines. So it was the 12 Chairs of a Literal Club. This is their logo. That's how it looked like. So just for you to illustrate how this satire worked well, and they created, let's say, it was a humorous page, all humor, Children's Room. And what they published in Children's Room, if you, for example, there was always shortages of oranges in the Soviet Union. So they say, if you want an orange, kid, if you truly have this need, get a Play-Doh in a store, make an orange or make more. That's it. Seemingly a children's verse, but obviously those who read between lines understood. Or about poor quality of life altogether, shortage of food. If your bowl is scarce of soup, get yourself a bigger loop. Now, looking through the loop, you will see a lot of soup. Okay, so again, for those who read between lines, it was clear. But the turning point was probably, I just picked this cartoon to illustrate a short story, actually, I would call it in America, we'll call it flat fiction, very short, by Andrei Kuchayev. He describes a night on the streets of Moscow, and alcoholics, some poor alcoholic tried to catch a taxi, which was always a problem. And he sees nearby that another fellow like him stays with the outstretched hand. And he takes, and he comes close to him. He is already very, very kind of almost frozen to death. He grabs him, he takes him home, put him in bed. And in the morning when he wakes up, he found that he pulled a monument from pedestal. And seemingly, what's the big deal? But it was created tremendous scandal. Why? Because for every Soviet citizen, it was clear that this satire was about this Lenin's pedestal, who was always shown with this outstretched hand, like going forward to the shining communism. And that's, again, an example of satire, a sapient satire between lines. So that was kind of the top what was possible to do. Well, along the same lines, I also wrote a story about kvass, about people trying to drink kvass on the streets of Moscow anyway. And eventually they, because it's less and less, somebody suggested to put some water there. Eventually everybody just drinks pure water, paying as a for kvass. So in other words, but they accept it because it's equality, kind of satire on equality. So that's the piece was also published in the Literary Gazette. Yeah. So that's probably what I wanted to tell, what my basic things that I describe in my book. And if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer to you.
Thank you very much, Emil. A reminder, if you do have questions for the author, you can send them by email at kennan@wilsoncenter.org, to our Twitter account at Kennan Institute, or right on our Facebook page. This was really just a a great read. And I'm going to start with a few questions of my own, and then we'll get to the audience's question. My first question, though, is really the impact of satire on the Soviet Union. I mean, you talked about what was allowed and what was not allowed. But in terms of what was allowed and all the criticisms about fraud and corruption and etc. that you said, to what extent did satire really contribute to the collapse of the Soviet Union?
Well, that's hard to say to what extent
You
satire.
can't, obviously you can't quantify it, but you know, they were limits, but the satire was real and struck a chord. So to what extent, what was that a part of?
I understand. Well, first of all, of course, this criticism, people, okay, Crocodile had power in the country. In what sense? I can tell you myself, since I had this Crocodile idea. After all, I wrote for them for 7, 8 years. Nobody wanted to be criticized on Crocodile. The moment, let's say in the Soviet Union, when it comes to any city, it's very hard to find a place in a hotel. But the moment I show you my Crocodile ID, they will find it for me. You understand? So in other words, it's not, that was not disregarded, absolutely not. Nobody wanted, because they knew there will be repercussions from party line and so on. They knew they would really don't want to spoil. They don't want to be, it's a big scandal for the local authorities if they get into pages of the Crocodile. That's no question. However, the other question that you posed, to what extent the satire was eventually, not, if not led, but it was part of, I would say the following, that satire of the literary gazette, of the kind that I told, the Sapiens satire, actually what really happened, it indicated already growing discontent with the Soviet system, that vast majority of intelligentsia did not buy all these slogans that we are building communism in our lifetime and all of this business. The proliferation of underground humor at that time was exactly the same reason. The enthusiasm that at least from what we know that our generation knew about back in the 20s, and it was no longer there. Nobody genuinely believed, when I say nobody of intelligentsia at the very least, believed that it would be anything that the party, that it became clear it's just a way to keep power, for the party to keep power in the country, no more than that, the very system of it. So to that extent, I would say it indicated that sooner or later it will come to a point then the party itself would understand we have to, some change has to be introduced, and that brought to Gorbachev time, as I showed in some of the covers of Crocodile. There were much more risky, much more wider kind of a object of satire opened up and so on. So that eventually, of course, it became impossible to sustain the system. They didn't work, simply didn't work.
I was fascinated, Emil, by your description of Odessa and your upbringing. And obviously, Odessa indirectly played a role both in your satire and you becoming a satirist, because somehow everyone believed that if you're from Odessa, you could be a satirist.
Sure.
So from your perspective, how did living in Odessa, a multinational, but predominantly Jewish city, shape you as a writer and as a satirist?
Well, that's the sustained mood. I also always ask myself this question, how it came about. Well, I told it why I started writing satire, just because by this editor from Moscow paper, once he learned I'm from Odessa, he assumed that, oh, then you I mean, well, what are you talking about? You have to write the satire. You know. Why? Odessa, as you already indicated, was created by the end of 19th century by Catherine the Great, to have access to the free, to the warm waters of the Black Sea, and try to sell grain to Europe, to facilitate selling it. So she invited Jews from all over the Pale of Settlement to come down and help with this business. And they came and they enjoyed it tremendously because it was the city was built by French architects. So when I first time came to Paris, I saw it already. The main quarters of Odessa were built by French architects. As a matter of fact, everybody knows about the Potemkin stairs, right, which was in the movie Battleship Potemkin. Is the Duke de Richelieu is the first mayor of Odessa, and he has the plan of the city and so on. So in other words, and there Italians live there. The best is the beautiful street in Odessa is called Italian, then later called Pushkin Street and so on. So in other words, it was melting pot of over 100 nationalities. When Mark Twain visited Odessa, and he describes it in The Innocents Abroad, he said, when we came to Odessa, we looked left, we looked right. It's nothing told us we're in Russia. It was America all the way. And what it is, my understanding is that because of so many nationalities living next to each other, humor usually ameliorates relationship between the groups. People have to live together and so on. So humor was part of kind of sustained mode of conversation. You would never say, in other words, if you say something really drastically right in the eye, it may create a scuffle, it may just fight. But if you just make a joke about it, you have an option to get out of it. You may just simply laugh and say, oh yeah, I got it, and so on and so forth. So that's why on the streets of Odessa, where I was as a youngster walk around, nobody really talked like Pravda, like in the editorial. Everybody was just simply talking about, it permeated with this kind of a spirit of humor. Therefore, for me, it became natural when I started writing it. I found that I have it in me without really ever thinking that I have.
Thank you. Just a reminder, if you have questions for Emil, you can send them by email at kennan@wilsoncenter.org, to our Twitter account at Kennan Institute, or write on our Facebook page. And we're getting some questions already. But I still have one more question to at least start off with. And that was the ability to criticize and what I want to kind of address is the question of satire and when it went too far, when you had to hold back, and I guess the follow-up question is, you talked about the role of satire in the Soviet Union. Is there an equivalent role of satire today, or in your perspective as a professor of Russian literature, or was it kind of only a certain time and a certain place, and in light of what has happened in the post-Soviet Union, is the role of satire diminished?
That's a good question, because the situation now, it's kind of different. We probably never in the Soviet time you would see so much tolerance to the open criticism, primarily because there are so much more media. You have internet, you have television channels more than 4. I remember that in the Soviet time we had only 4 channels, and I remember the joke. I lost you for some reason.
We still see you, Emil, so go ahead.
And so I remember this in the Soviet time, it was 4 channels. So if let's say Brezhnev is speaking to the, gives a speech, so all channels will be, you got channel from, you switch from channel 1 to 2, it will be Brezhnev speaking, channel 3, Brezhnev speaking, then channel 4, there will be KGB telling me, go back to channel 1. That was the all. In other words, it was total control over media. Now it's different. Now I'm sometimes amazed what kind of things were possible let's say, about the recent one about Navalny and his video, it would be unthinkable in Soviet time to have anything like that. So definitely control of the media is incomparable from that standpoint of view. And satire, I mean, I read Sorokin's book, Dень Опричника, The Day of Опричник. It would be totally impossible to see anything like that in Soviet time, even the most mild of the time that it was. So in other words, that's satire definitely is now. I don't think by and large, when you have an open society, satire does not need it that much. Oftentimes they ask, how come in the Soviet Union you have all this hidden, whatever it is? There was no parliament, there was no bringing up real issues in the country. Nobody, everybody was decided on top of the small echelon nomenclature of the party, what's going to be and so on. So therefore, there was no really why bother? You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So therefore, what I'm saying is satire in America, yes, still exists. And I remember coming back and looking at the satirical field. They published Art Buchwald, for example. Art Buchwald was translated into Russian and published in Pravda, probably every single piece of his writing. Why? For this reason. He criticized CIA, criticized the White House, and so on. Okay, so obviously for us, there was something else that we would only marvel. My God, what kind of a freedom they have in America if this is possible to do. See, it kind of worked the other way. So yes. we perceived, my gosh, look what they can do. Nothing like that would be possible, of course, in the Soviet Union. No.
Great. So I'm going to get to our audience's questions now. The first one is from Mike Rode, and he asked, can you talk more about the cartoonists in Crocodile? Did you know them? Was there a floor everyone worked together on? So did you interact with the cartoonists?
Actually, I not just interact, I actually befriended one of the cartoonists for Literary Gazette, Bavchanyan. He was very talented, very famous cartoonist who relatively recently, he immigrated also. He was the first to meet me when I immigrated. He was the first to meet me in Vienna airport. So what he, for example, what he did at some other, maybe I have opportunity. And so he did, he worked for the Club of 12 Chairs, and his cartoons were of that kind of a sort of, I tried to describe the cartoon that he produced that had exactly this quality. It seemingly just landscape, and we see the sun is a little bit coming, but the upper features of the sun tells us that this is Joseph Stalin. So any of us clearly understood what he's trying to do, that Stalinism is on the rise. See? That kind of style he had. In other words, you could not immediately accuse him of anything, but by your ability to interpret what he's trying to show. So yes, I knew him personally. We had kind of friendship between him. Yeah.
Our next question comes from Wayne Murray, who is a senior fellow at the American Foreign Policy Council. And he notes that the best satire I ever saw in the USSR in 1982 was the film Sport Lotto 1982, very funny romantic comedy. I was astonished it could be made and shown. Do you recall it? And what can you tell us about it?
Sport Lotto? No, yes. I don't remember that. First of all, I want to just remind that I immigrated, I came to America on the eve of 1975. So whatever happened back in the Soviet Union was, especially in the first decade of my trying to find footing in the new country, was kind of not of most. No, I don't. I will definitely will check out this movie. But by and large, yes, there were kind of satirical comedies, movie comedies in the Soviet Union in the period that we the period of this, let's say, late 60s and early 70s. For example, I remember the Brilliant Hand, Brillante Ruka. And there were some things like that, some kind of again, reading between lines. For example, a local official in Georgia, where the action takes place, the communication, he's dressed in Stalinka, means it's the format of his uniform is what is typical was in Stalin's portrait. So for us was clear, this is an attempt to show this is little Stalin. And obviously he was also talking with accent, had some mustache and so on. In other words, it was not a full, it didn't look like Stalin, but it was indication that this is little Stalin in this locality. Things like that existed not only in the press, as I described, but also in the movie industry. And actually the Fitil, the Week, the movie, also had short, very funny skits that had this kind of an implication of criticism. One that quickly comes to my mind is that they show two dispatchers sitting, and one is taking a phone call. What should we do? One is old, the other is young. What do you want it to do? Well, move this. This is a railroad station. Move this car wagon to the number 5 rails. And he just hangs up doing nothing. The younger one says, why are we are not rushing doing something? Don't worry, let's play. And they play domino, meanwhile, during working time, of course. Then again, a phone call says, well, okay. So finally, he says, this guy, in other words, the implication that those in command don't know what they're doing, but eventually everything stays the way it was. There was no need. So his experienced man knows that this is not another satire like that. But it was at the same time reduced by presenting the man who gave this command. He finally walks in, if I describe it. He is shown with the sign of higher education. In other words, he's a newly just got his higher education, and he doesn't know yet what life about. But it was clear that up to this point, there was implication, it's not about him. The whole system is not working.
Great. I have the next question from Victoria Spolkin, and she asked, as a follow-up, were there tensions and factions within Crocodile about the acceptable boundaries of satire?
Well, of course there were tensions, and there were some much more devoted to the system than others. As a matter of fact, to the extent I might bring up that when it just happened that in 1980, when a small publishing house in America published a collection of Soviet underground jokes that I compiled together, their Crocodile, then I was reported later on, Crocodile published, and then I was, after the book came out, it got some kind of visibility. Mark Griffin show. Then Washington Post published an interview with me, and in the course of the interview, I said, obviously, asked the question about Soviet satire and the rest of it. They then, the Voice of America translated this into Russian and beamed it to the Soviet Union. And then later on, within the Crocodile, there were at least two, there is no need to use name, journalists who said, oh, we should reply to him. And they did reply editorial from Crocodile telling that they don't know me, who I am, I'm just pretending I had anything in connection with satire and things like that. So in other words, yes, there were more people devoted to the system, and some other that he eventually could not. So I know some of my colleagues of that time stayed in Russia, and till now, some immigrated like me later on. And so that was obviously not everybody was kind of many of them took part in it cynically, not believing at all that anything like that can be salvaged of the Soviet system.
Just a reminder that if you have questions for our speaker, you can send them via email at kennan@wilsoncenter.org, to our Twitter account at Kennan Institute, or right on our Facebook page. You've addressed this a little bit, but one person asks, what specific qualities made satire entertaining for the public? And when a piece of satire landed too well for the public, did it have a potential to backfire with the Soviet authorities? Well, you have personal experience with that. But,
yeah, well, that's what I say. That,
yes.
but when my piece of this feuilleton about the play was published, I got many compliments from readers. They found it funny because it was a spoof of the play that I saw that was written. So they enjoyed the writing itself, and so nobody of us thought that would be a problem. The problem was simply because of the who was the author of it. And that what really is interesting to me, and I still have some mystery about it, that the editor-in-chief of the Crocodile, he went several times to, I was reported by people who worked there, to the Central Committee trying to defend his publication. And eventually, there was practically, it was divided between Furtseva, the Minister of Culture of that time, to whom this nomenclature of the author of the play, and whoever was in charge of the propaganda department, right, to whom the editor of Crocodile appealed. So eventually they decided, well, yeah, and then it's a long story. You read the book, you know, that I show how it was done, not directly, but through publication in Literary Gazette, if you remember,
right.
And how they try to manipulate it and so on. So in other words, many readers, it was popular because it was not much kind of a comedy in the Soviet Union as such. There was no institutional stand-up comedy to begin with, none in the Soviet time. So there was nothing of that. So obviously, every good comedy was a tremendously population because it was we all need to cheer up from time to time at least, right? And that obviously yes. Crocodile primarily was served this purpose, not because people read it and say, oh, what this was allowed was no, because cartoons were written. It was the best cartoonist in the country worked for Crocodile, and I don't think they really cared much because they had the opportunity to make a living, to do something that they enjoy doing it, you know, from purely professional point of view. So what can I say? Yeah, it was primarily food for some entertainment, some joy of life that was not too much on a daily basis.
So I have a question about your chosen profession when you came to America. Clearly, you had been discriminated against in a variety of ways as a Jew in the Soviet Union, and yet you gravitated to the Russian language. And so what made you decide that, obviously you had some advantages, you spoke Russian, et cetera, but what made you, when you came to America, decide that Russian literature was something that you wanted to specialize?
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I never equated a Soviet system with Russian, because I grew up in Russian culture. There's no question about did I read anything? Yes, of course, I read Sholem Aleichem translated into Russian, but that is as much. I had exposure to the Jewish culture. Otherwise, what? Pushkin, Lermontov. I mean, I grew up totally on Russian culture. So for me, Russian culture was familiar. Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Chekhov, and I tried to write, obviously, I tried to imitate not the Sholem Aleichem stories because they were full of kind of Jews that seemingly already in the past and so on. There was some kind of, and that's recently we talk about with friends, there was some kind of still kind of instilled like the vector of going into the brighter world. It's not because of the communism, no, but because of the Enlightenment. The spirit of Enlightenment still was alive on the kind of underpinning of the people's desire. So in Russian literature, whatever it was, obviously the best of Russian literature was humanistic. It was full of kind of a attempt to overcome the miserable life that exists and so on. So for me, obviously I knew Russian literature well, and the opportunity came up simply because a friend of one of my relatives, I brought out of the country clippings of my publication just from my own memory. But it played a role. They showed they needed graduate students at UCLA. They looked and they invited me to teach Russian and to be part of, and then enroll as a teaching assistant and enroll in school. So for me, it was kind of a natural way of to find my footing in America by going something that I knew quite well. Yeah.
This is a question from Eva Winderman. She asks whether your books are also published in Russia and sold there, and what your action was in the in the Russian Federation.
No, you won't believe it. Yeah, as you know, I published quite a number of books. I never made an attempt to. Well, there's one book that I thought it would be good to be published in Russia. It's unlike any other book that I wrote. That was a biography of a Soviet spy that I met many years ago, a year before I left Russia. That eventually, some 20 years later, I published it. It was published at Northwestern University Press. It was translated into Polish, and the grandson of the main character, I mean, it's a nonfiction book. He lives in Moscow, and so I sent him a number of copies of the book, and he took it to a number of publishing houses in Moscow to see whether I would be interested to translate and publish in Russian, because seemingly it's all a Russian story. It's about Russian hero, about men who try to do the best for the country, but wind up to be in Gulag for 16 years. And they told him, no, they're not interested. And I clearly understand why. Because the official biography today, if you go on site of the FSB of Dmitry Bristolyotov, that yeah, he was some mistake were made. There was not a word how horrifically he was tortured, not a word that he spent 16 years in Gulag and barely survived because he came out and so on. So in other words, probably my assumption is that nobody wants to know the truth, the full truth of how the country paid back to its heroes back in the 30s. And despite the fact that he served the country, he provided with 4-year plan of rearmament of Germany. He did everything he possibly could, risking his life. And that was the payback. So that's my assumption that they don't want, but I'm not making any effort to, I would not say no, of course, but I would not make any efforts to offer to publish any of my books. And, well, primarily some of my scholarly books, I mean, obviously like about humor, Making War Not Love, Gender and Sexuality, Russian Humor. It's a study of Russian culture as it represents itself in its humor, or ethnic humor in Russia, also Taking Penguins to the Movies, right? It's also about sociological studies, it's scholarly. So scholars read it. I know that you know, of course we know scholars citation. I know who and when, which book quotes, I mean, who reads my work and cites and so on and so forth, but I'm not making any effort to be published there. I don't know.
This is a follow-up question that you kind of addressed, but I'm going to ask it again. Can you comment on the censorship of satire in Putin's Russia?
Oh, the only thing I know that before Putin came to power, during Yeltsin time, there was this satirical, very biting television show called Kukly, Puppets.
I remember Kukly. Yes, it was. Okay. It was biting. Yes.
And the moment they went, one of the puppets, who was Putin, the show was closed.
Yes.
That's so much for satire. In other words, still thin skin, you know, about that kind of a thing. So in that respect. But otherwise, as I say again, there are so many other open venues of criticism. Satire usually is needed when you cannot do it openly, you know, when you have to find some way to make fun of something, really ridicule, or I mean, there's no need. So there are now proliferation of it. I think those in power became smarter. They decided, do we really need to separate, to give this food to the West, telling, well, we suppress them? Let's go. Vast majority still support the system, so why we should bother? I think it's just a more smarter approach to it, in my sense.
Here's a question from Naringa Klumbitya from Miami University at Oxford, Ohio. And she asked, what were the relationships between the satirists in Russia and the satirists in different republics?
Well, it's a good question, because as I mentioned, Crocodile, there were also spin-offs in several republics. For example, in Ukraine, the journal of the same kind was called Pepper. In Tatar, even it's not a republic at that time, was part of just autonomic republic, was a Scorpio, Chayan called, and I published some pieces there as well. So there was a kind of, obviously they looked up to Crocodile of what kind of things what they could do, but it was not just Crocodile. Absolutely, it was something in Armenia, I believe, in Georgia, and some other republics. They had the same kind of a Crocodile in the language of the republic.
So you were actually trained as an engineer, and
Yes.
And a scientific background. So how did you think that you could actually become a satirist?
But as I said, I never knew.
You never knew.
First of all, I started, well, I my degree, as you know, because there was little choice of my time right after Stalin's death to get education in literature, journalism, so on. So my mother said, first you'll become an engineer, then do whatever you want. That's exactly what really happened. So when I got my degree in electrical engineering from Odessa Polytechnical Institute, I worked, it was customary, I mean, not customary, plan of, you go to work for 3 years for any of this, wherever state sends you. So they sent me to Kiev, and in Kiev, I worked as a foreman in one of the local gas industry settings. But at the same time, I always wanted to be a writer. So at that time, I remember I met a journalist from Ukrainian radio. And as we walked, I told her some of the stories that I heard from my father. And my father was a house painter, as I described in my book. So he was privy sometime to life in the family. And he told me this story about how children, spoiled children were fed in Odessa. So the child refused to eat anywhere, just in a streetcar, that's all. So the mother would take Kasha and the child to the streetcar, and every time, every stop, she would say, well, for mama, for papa, and for the stop of Rosa Luxemburg, of the street, and so on. In other words, that kind of a funny, what really happened. And he didn't invent, he simply retold me this. So when I told her this story, she says, very, very funny, she translated it into Ukrainian and was beamed and read. So it's my first introduction. And as you know, the bug bits you, and I always wanted to be a writer. So that's why, again, I wrote some lyrical pieces, and the one that happened in Moscow paper, it actually was a lyrical, kind of a short lyrical story that I brought. But I repeat myself, but the editor, the moment he heard you have some accent. I say, yeah, I'm from Odessa. Oh, then you have to write us a satirical. That's the whole thing started. That I was sort of derailed, if you wish.
So we have one last technical question from Errol Henderson at Penn State University. And he asks, one satirical joke is a party apparatchik commending the greatest inventor of the 20th century, Comrade Regaspatov, which is the abbreviation of registered US Patent Office, evoking Soviet expropriation of Western technology. What was the source of this, and do you know anything about it?
No, I've never heard of it. I'm sorry. No.
Okay, that's okay. Well, we're coming to the end of our hour, and it was just a fascinating conversation about your experiences, both in the Soviet Union and in the United States. I guess my last question is your decision to emigrate. How did you come to the decision that you needed to emigrate? And did you think that you would still be somehow attached to Russian culture when you came to the United States, or did you anticipate a clean break?
Well, it's a very good question for that vast majority of people do not know, and that's why I wrote it in my book, that it was a highly risky decision even to apply for immigration at that time. Why? Because the moment you apply for immigration, you tell to the authorities, you never can be trusted anymore. That's it. So that means end of your career wherever you are. At best, you can find, if you have skills, work as a plumber or as a elevator operator, things like that. That's it. So it was risky. At the same time, exactly what the question you asked, what I'm going to do? Because I parted with my engineering profession way like 10 years before I actually immigrated, because I got a job as the editor of the publishing house Niedra, I edited technical books, but I never kind of experienced. And obviously America we all thought about America, a country of such advanced technology. How come I can survive even if I knew something about it, or still remember? So it was an extremely, extremely risky undertaking. And frankly speaking, what really helped me, and I believe I did put it in the book, that I saw an American movie by Stanley Kramer, Bless the Children and the Beasts. And this while I watched this movie, and this about the group of teenagers who were outraged that the buffaloes are shot from kind of a point blank for entertainment, and then at night they come and open up the space for them to run away, and they don't. And I remember sitting there and then thinking, oh my God, I'm like these buffaloes. I'm an animal. I'm having a chance to run away, and I'm still sitting it. Next day, I thought that I would not be able to see myself in the mirror. That's what I did. I decided no matter what will happen, I have to. So whatever happened to me in America was a pure, totally unexpected. And I had never plans whatsoever. I just thought getting out just to be able to see myself in the mirror and not to be spit on myself.
Well, thank you very much, Emil, for your discussion today, for this excellent book. I didn't live in the Soviet Union. I visited it for a week, but indeed it brought back a lot of memories nevertheless. So it is just a great read. Again, if you want to purchase the book, you can use the code CROC, C-R-O-C 30 on the University of Wisconsin Press website and save 30%. So Emil, it was a great pleasure to have you here to discuss your book, and to our audience, we look forward to your future attendance at Kennan Institute events. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.